The salvage yard on Kepler Station reeked of rust and broken dreams. Marcus Flint picked his way through the maze of twisted metal and defunct starship parts, his weathered hands checking cargo manifests that told lies as smooth as silk. 20 years of running contraband through the outer rim had taught him that survival meant keeping your head down, your mouth shut, and your heart locked away where it couldn't get you killed. That philosophy had served him well until he found the girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, curled up behind a stack of plasma conduits like a wounded animal. Her clothes were little more than rags, but it was her skin that made Marcus stop cold. It glowed with a soft, pearl-like luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, creating patterns of light that shifted from silver to deep blue. "Hey there, kid," Marcus said, crouching down slowly. His voice was rough from years of cheap tobacco and cheaper whiskey, but he kept it gentle. "You lost?" The girl looked up at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone so young. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical quality that seemed to resonate with the metal around them. "I'm looking for the crystal world," she said simply. "The place where light grows from the ground and the buildings sing." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The kid was clearly traumatized, probably hallucinating. But there was something about the way she spoke, the certainty in her voice, that made him hesitate before dismissing her words as fantasy. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Nira," she said, then added something in a language he'd never heard before, all flowing syllables and harmonic undertones. "At least, I think that's my name. Sometimes I remember other things, but they feel like dreams." Marcus studied her more carefully. The luminescent skin was definitely not human, though her features were close enough to pass in poor lighting. He'd seen a few non-human species in his travels, but none quite like this. The Zephyrians from the inner systems had similar traits, but they were a reclusive people who rarely ventured into the outer rim. "How long have you been here, Nira?" She shrugged, a gesture that seemed oddly mature. "Time moves differently when you're hiding. The station masters don't like children who can't pay docking fees." That explained why she was in the salvage yard. Kepler Station had a reputation for being unwelcoming to refugees and strays. The local authorities preferred problems that solved themselves quietly. "Where are your parents?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her features. "I don't remember them clearly. Sometimes I dream about a woman with a crown made of starlight, but when I wake up, it fades like mist." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he'd thought he'd successfully buried years ago. He'd lost his own family to raiders when he was barely older than this girl. He knew the particular kind of emptiness that came from being alone in an uncaring universe. "Listen, kid, I've got a ship. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and the food recycler works most of the time. You want to come with me while I figure out where you belong?" Nira's luminescence brightened with what he was learning to recognize as hope. "You'd do that? Even though you don't know me?" "Sometimes that's exactly when you should help someone," Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. He stood up and extended his hand. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up and fed." As they made their way through the station's cramped corridors toward the docking bays, Marcus tried to ignore the way people stared at Nira's glowing skin. A few merchants looked interested in a way that made his hand drift toward his sidearm, but most just seemed curious. His ship, the Wayward Star, wasn't much to look at. She was a modified cargo hauler with more patches than original hull plating, but she was fast when she needed to be and had hiding spots that could fool most customs inspectors. "It's perfect," Nira said, her eyes wide as she took in the cramped but functional interior. "It feels like safety." Marcus found himself smiling despite his better judgment. "She's not pretty, but she's reliable. Let me show you where you can sleep." The ship's passenger cabin hadn't been used in years, serving mainly as storage for Marcus's more legitimate cargo. As he cleared out boxes of medical supplies and water purification tablets. Nira explored with the careful movements of someone who had learned not to break things that didn't belong to them. "Marcus," she said suddenly, her voice carrying a strange note of recognition. "That's not your real name, is it?" He froze, a crate half lifted in his hands. Very few people knew that Marcus Flint was an identity he'd bought on a forge station 12 years ago. "What makes you say that?" "I'm good at reading people," Nira said with a matter-of-fact tone that children used to discuss obvious truths. "It's a skill you learn when you're alone a lot." "Your name feels borrowed." Marcus set down the crate and studied her carefully. "You're right. My real name was Marcus Thorne. But that man died a long time ago. Why?" The simple question hung in the recycled air between them. Marcus had never told anyone the real story of how he'd lost everything and everyone he'd ever cared about. But something about this strange, luminescent child made the words come easier than they should have. Because Marcus Thorne had people he loved, and loving people in this universe is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable. It gives your enemies leverage. He resumed clearing the cabin, his movements sharp with old pain. "Marcus Flint doesn't have those problems." Nira was quiet for a long moment, her skin patterns shifting to deeper blues that somehow conveyed understanding. "Maybe Marcus Flint is lonelier than Marcus Thorne ever was." The observation hit him like a physical blow. Marcus turned to find her watching him with those two old eyes, and for a moment he felt completely transparent. "Maybe," he admitted quietly. "But Marcus Flint is still alive. So am I," Nira said simply. "And so are you." Sometimes that has to be enough to start with. As Marcus finished preparing her sleeping space, he found himself wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Taking on a passenger was complicated enough, but taking on a mystery wrapped in luminescent skin and carrying memories of crystal worlds was probably the kind of decision that would change everything. But as he watched Nira curl up on the simple cot with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, Marcus decided that some complications were worth the risk. After all, he'd spent 12 years running from his past. Maybe it was time to run toward something instead. Dr. Vera Blackwood had joined Marcus's crew 3 months ago with forged credentials and a medical bag that contained equipment worth more than his entire ship. She claimed to be fleeing a bad marriage on the core worlds, but Marcus suspected the truth was more complicated. Good doctors didn't usually end up patching smugglers and asking no questions about the cargo. Not that he minded. Vera was competent, kept to herself, and had steady hands when blaster wounds needed stitching. In the dangerous business of running contraband through contested space, having a skilled medic aboard was worth more than an extra gun. He just hadn't expected her to fall in love with the mysterious child within the first hour of meeting. Her cellular structure is extraordinary, Vera murmured, studying the readings on her medical scanner with the intensity of someone making a groundbreaking discovery. The bioluminescent organs are completely integrated with her nervous system, responding to emotional and psychological stimuli in real time. Nira sat patiently on the medical bay's examination table, her skin patterns shifting between curious silver and amused gold as she watched Vera work. The child seemed fascinated by the older woman's focused attention, having spent so long invisible to the adults around her. "Is that unusual?" Marcus asked from where he leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. He'd intended this to be a simple medical check to make sure the kid was healthy enough to travel, but Vera had been at it for over an hour. "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it," Vera said, her dark eyes bright with excitement. "I've read papers about Cephrean physiology, but I've never seen it firsthand. The way her system processes light and converts it to cellular energy is unlike anything in human biology." "Zephyrian?" Marcus straightened. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made their situation significantly more complicated. The Zephyrian worlds were isolationist to the extreme, with borders that most smugglers avoided entirely. Without question, Vera said, running another scan. But there's something else. Nira, sweetheart, can you tell me about your earliest memories? The girl's luminescence dimmed thoughtfully. Mostly fragments. A woman singing in a language that made the crystals hum. A room that was all made of light, with windows that looked out on 3 different suns. And double quotes, she hesitated, her patterns shifting to uncertain purples. People bowing when I walked past. But that part feels like a dream. Vera's scanner nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. She looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed wonder and terror in equal measure. What is it? Marcus demanded. I need to run a comparative genetic analysis, Vera said, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus, could I speak with you privately? They stepped into the corridor outside the medical bay, leaving Nira to examine Vera's equipment with a kind of careful curiosity that suggested familiarity with advanced technology. Talk, Marcus said. Vera took a deep breath. 8 years ago, Princess Neroth of the Zephyrian Empire was killed in a terrorist attack, along with her entire escort. She was 3 years old. The attack was brutal enough that no bodies were recovered. Marcus felt the universe tilt around him. You think our Nira is a royal heir who's been missing for 8 years and presumed dead? Yes. Vera's voice was barely above a whisper. The age fits, the physiology is perfect, and some of her memory fragments. Marcus, she remembers the Crystal Palace. She remembers people bowing to her. That's impossible. She was found on Kepler Station, living like a refugee. The same Kepler Station. That serves as a black market hub for human trafficking, Vera pointed out grimly. If someone wanted to hide a kidnapped princess, keeping her drugged or traumatized enough to suppress her memories, while selling her into the slave trade would be effective. Marcus ran a hand through his graying hair, trying to process the implications. Even if you're right, we can't prove it. And taking her back to Zephyrian space without proof would be suicide. Actually, Vera said, pulling up a holographic display on her portable scanner, I think I can prove it. Royal Zephyrians have unique genetic markers that are impossible to fake. If I can cross-reference Nira's DNA with archived royal bloodline data, double quotes, where exactly are you planning to get archived royal bloodline data? Marcus asked sarcastically. Vera's cheeks flushed pink. I may have access to certain classified medical databases. From my previous position. What previous position? For a moment, Vera looked like she wanted to retreat back into the comfortable lies they'd both been living. Then she squared her shoulders and met his eyes. Directly, I was chief medical officer at the Imperial Research Institute on Centauri Prime. I specialized in xenobiology, with a focus on diplomatic medicine. She paused. I didn't leave because of a bad marriage, Marcus. I left because I discovered that my research was being used to develop biological weapons targeted at specific species. Pieces clicked into place with uncomfortable clarity. You're not just a doctor. You're a war crimes whistleblower. Former war crimes whistleblower, Vera corrected. Currently a fugitive with a price on her head and a very guilty conscience. She looked back toward the medical bay where Nira was humming softly to herself. But I still have access to the databases I used in my research, including the comprehensive genetic profiles of all major royal bloodlines. Marcus studied her face, seeing past the careful professional mask to the woman beneath. Vera Blackwood was running from more than just legal troubles. She was running from the knowledge of what her work had enabled, and finding Nira felt like a chance at redemption. Even if we prove she's the princess, then what? We can't exactly walk up to the Zephyrian border and say, excuse me, we found your missing royalty. No, Vera agreed. But we could contact someone with the authority to arrange a proper diplomatic meeting. Someone who would have the resources to verify her identity and ensure her safe return. And who exactly did you have in mind? Vera hesitated. There's a former Zephyrian royal guard named Jorik Steele. He was part of Princess Neerith's security detail when she disappeared. After the attack, he left royal service and became a freelance military contractor. But he's maintained contacts within the Zephyrian government. You seem to know a lot about this Jorik Steele. He was one of my contacts when I was researching Zephyrian physiology. We corresponded professionally for several years. Vera's flush deepened. He's a good man, honorable. If anyone would help us navigate this situation safely, it would be him. Marcus caught the subtle shift in her tone when she mentioned Steele and filed it away for later consideration. Where is he now? Last I heard, he was running security patrols along the neutral zone border. If we head toward Zephyrian space, we're likely to encounter his ships. They were interrupted by Neera appearing in the doorway, her skin patterns bright with curiosity. Are you talking about me? We're discussing your medical results, Vera said gently, crouching down to the child's eye level. Neera, I think you might be from a very important family. Would you like us to help you find them? The girl's luminescence shifted through several colors before, settling on a warm gold that seemed to indicate hope mixed with uncertainty. What if they don't remember me? What if they don't want me back? Marcus felt that familiar twist in his chest again. He knelt beside Vera, bringing himself to Neera's level. Kid, if you really are who we think you are, then there's a woman somewhere who's been grieving for you every day for 8 years. Trust me, she wants you back. How can you be sure? Because, Marcus said, surprised by the roughness in his own voice, that's what parents do. They never stop loving their children, no matter how much time passes or how far they have to travel to bring them home. Neera studied his face with those two wise eyes. Is that what your parents would have done for you? The question hit him like a physical blow. Marcus stood up abruptly, his walls slamming back into place. We should set course for the neutral zone. If Vera's right about this Jorik Steele, he's our best bet for getting you home safely. As he headed for the bridge, Marcus tried to ignore the way Vera was watching him with newfound understanding. He'd revealed more about himself in that moment than he'd intended, but seeing the hope in Neera's luminescent patterns had made him want to give her something to believe in. Even if his own parents had died, too young to come looking for him, he could make sure this lost princess found her way back to the family that was waiting for her dot behind him. He heard Vera's gentle voice explaining the plan to Neera, and the child's excited questions about what her real home might be like. For the first time in years, Marcus found himself hoping that the universe might actually have a happy ending in store for someone. He just prayed they'd all live long enough to see it. The patrol ship, Sentinel's Edge, drifted at the boundary between neutral space and the Zephyrian Empire like a sleeping predator. Captain Jorik Steele stood on his bridge, watching the scanner displays with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 15 years learning to read the subtle patterns that meant trouble. His ship was a modified military corvette, sleek and dangerous in a way that discouraged pirates and convinced customs officials to be reasonable. The crew was small but skilled, mostly former military personnel who understood the value of discretion and the importance of loyalty. Jorik himself was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of scars that spoke of real combat experience. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes held the weight of old losses that he carried like a familiar burden. Captain, his communications officer called out, "We've got an unregistered cargo hauler approaching from the neutral zone. They're requesting permission to enter Zephyrian space." Requesting permission? Jorik raised an eyebrow. Most smugglers either tried to sneak past the patrols or bribe their way through. Polite requests were unusual enough to be suspicious. What's their ship designation? The Wayward Star, registered out of Kepler Station. Captain is listed as Marcus Flint. Jorik frowned. The name was familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. Run a background check on Flint and scan their ship for weapons and contraband. Already running, sir. The ship is lightly armed. Nothing unusual for a cargo hauler in contested space. But ... The officer paused, studying his readings. Sir, they're broadcasting on a medical emergency frequency. They claim to have a passenger who requires immediate diplomatic attention. Medical emergency or diplomatic attention? Jorik's frown deepened. Those are usually mutually exclusive. Before his officer could respond, the communications console lit up with an incoming priority message. The encryption signature was one Jorik recognized immediately: Dr. Vera Blackwood, the brilliant xenobiologist, who had been one of his few sources of reliable information about non-human physiology during his years as a Royal Guard. Sir, we're receiving a coded transmission. Personal channel. High encryption. Put it through to my ready room, Jorik said, and have the Wayward Star maintain position until I give clearance. In the privacy of his quarters, Jorik activated the secure communication channel. Vera's face appeared on the holographic display, and he felt the familiar flutter of attraction that had complicated their professional relationship for years. Jorik, she said, her voice tight with stress and excitement. I need your help with something that could change everything. Vera. He kept his tone carefully, neutral despite the way his pulse quickened at seeing her face. I heard you'd left the Institute. There were rumors about... The rumors are true, she interrupted. But that's not why I'm calling. Jorik, I'm aboard a ship carrying a child who claims to be from the Crystal World. A child with Zephyrian physiology and genetic markers that suggest royal bloodline. Jorik felt the world shift beneath him. That's impossible. Princess Nereith died 8 years ago. Did she? Vera's image leaned forward intently. Or did someone want us to believe she died? Jorik, I've run every test I can think of. This child has memories of the Crystal Palace, knowledge of royal protocols, and genetic markers that are a perfect match for the royal line. For a moment, Jorik couldn't breathe. The attack that had killed Princess Nereith had destroyed his life as completely as if he'd died with her. He'd been her personal guard, responsible for her safety, and his failure had cost an innocent child her life and the Empire its heir. Even if what you're saying is true, he said carefully, why contact me? You know I'm no longer in royal service, because you're the only person I trust with this, Vera said simply, and because you loved her like a daughter. If there's even a chance that Nereith is alive, don't you owe it to her memory to find out? The words hit him like a physical blow. He had loved the little princess, had delighted in her bright curiosity and fearless laughter. Her death had been the reason he'd left the Royal Guard, unable to face Queen Solara's grief or his own crushing sense of failure. I'll need to see her myself, Jorik said finally. Bring your ship aboard. But Vera, if this is some kind of elaborate con, I won't be able to protect you from the consequences. I understand, Vera said. And Jorik? Thank you for trusting me. 20 minutes later, Jorik stood in the Sentinel's Edge's main hangar as the Wayward Star settled onto the docking platform. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing in a way it hadn't since his days as an active guard. The cargo hauler's airlock cycled open, and 3 figures emerged. Jorik recognized Vera immediately, her dark hair pulled back and her medical scanner clutched in her hands like a shield. Beside her stood a grizzled smuggler who had to be Marcus Flint, his weathered face set in defensive lines. And between them walked a child who made Jorik's breath catch in his throat. She was small for her age, with the luminescent skin and flowing hair of a Zephyrian royal. Her patterns were currently showing curiosity, mixed with nervousness, shifting between silver and pale blue in ways that stirred memories Jorik had tried to bury, but it was her eyes that convinced him. They were the same shade of deep violet as Queen Solara's, and they held the same intelligence that had made 3-year-old Princess Neerath such a delight to guard. "Hello," the child said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people. "Are you Captain Steele? Vera said you might be able to help me find my way home." Jorik knelt slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. Years of training kicked in automatically. How to approach a member of the royal family without appearing threatening. How to read the subtle language of Zephyrian luminescence. How to speak in tones that conveyed respect without formality. "I am," he said gently. "And what should I call you?" "Neera," she said, then added something in formal Zephyrian that made Jorik's blood run cold. It was the traditional greeting of a royal heir to a member of the guard, pronounced with perfect accent and inflection. "Where did you learn those words?" Jorik asked, his voice barely steady. "I've always known them," Neera said, her patterns shifting to confused purples. "Sometimes I remember things without knowing why I remember them. Like how to stand when important people are watching, or which fork to use for the crystallized fruits, or the song that makes the palace lights dance." Each detail was like a knife to Jorik's heart. These were things that only someone raised in the Crystal Palace would know. Intimate details of royal life that were never recorded in any database. The song that makes the palace lights dance? He repeated. Without hesitation, Neera began to hum a melody that Jorik recognized instantly. It was a lullaby that Queen Solara had sung to her daughter, a piece of ancient music that caused the palace's bioluminescent systems to respond in harmony. He'd heard it countless times during his years of service, always accompanied by a little girl's delighted laughter. "My God," Marcus muttered, seeing the recognition on Jorik's face. "She really is the princess." Jorik stood slowly, his mind racing through the implications. If Princess Neerath was alive, it changed everything. The succession crisis that had plagued the empire, the political marriages that had been arranged to secure the bloodline, the grief that had consumed Queen Solara for 8 years, all of it could be undone. But it also raised terrible questions about who had taken her and why, about the attack that was supposed to have killed her, about the forces that had kept her hidden for so long. "Vera," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "how certain are you of the genetic match?" 99.7%, she replied immediately. I cross-referenced her DNA against archived samples from the royal medical files. "There's no doubt." Jorik looked at the child who might be the most important person in the galaxy, currently examining his ship's hangar with the bright curiosity of someone rediscovering a half-remembered world. She was so small, so vulnerable, and the weight of protecting her felt exactly like the burden he'd carried and failed 8 years ago. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Jorik said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just remembered his true purpose, "we take her home. But carefully. There are people who have spent 8 years believing she's dead, and some of them might prefer to keep it that way." He activated his communicator, opening a secure channel to the Zephyrian capital. "This is Captain Jorik Steele requesting immediate audience with Queen Solara. Priority Alpha. Personal recognition code Starlight 7. The response came within minutes, the Queen's personal secretary appearing on his display with barely concealed shock. "Captain Steele? But you're—" "That is, Her Majesty wasn't expecting ... Tell her," Jorik said, his eyes never leaving Neera's luminescent form, "that I have news about her daughter. And tell her to prepare for a miracle." As the communication closed, Jorik felt the familiar weight of royal duty settling on his shoulders. He'd failed Princess Neerath once. He would not fail her again. The journey home was about to begin, and this time he would make sure it ended with a reunion 8 years in the making. "Welcome back, Your Highness," he said softly, offering the child a formal bow that made her luminescence brighten with surprised delight. Some promises, Jorik realized, were worth keeping no matter how long it took to fulfill them. And some failures could be redeemed with a second chance and the courage to see it through. The princess was going home.